but the sofa on which he sat with Selina might as well have been the farthest star in the sky. Then, driven by resentment and a determination to soothe her wounded vanity, she suddenly directed her advances toward Samboro. That handsome young groom was utterly bored by his serious and drowsy Salia, who kept her wide eyes on him with an expression of adoring rapture, just as she gazed at the stations in the mission when performing the Via Crucis. In his mind, Carminia was the most attractive woman in the room, and he felt flattered by her attention. Besides, he was securely married. So he drifted over to her, danced with her, flirted with her, and dedicated himself to her whims until everyone was taking notice, and I thought that Salia would burst into tears. Right at that moment, though, when we were all on edge, Don Hernandez banged on the door with his cane and commanded us all to go to sleep. Chapter 19. The following morning, we set off early for the Rancho de las Rocas, which was 3 miles away from Santa Barbara. The townspeople stayed behind, but all our friends from town joined us, making our group quite large once again. Our destination was a gathering for snacks and a barbecue, where whole bullocks would be roasted on spits over a bed of coals in a deep hole. Californians could quickly shake off their tiredness in just a few hours of sleep, so we were feeling refreshed and lively, as if we had gone to bed at 8 the previous night. Carminia somehow managed to ride alongside Melendez, and I couldn't help but wonder if she would win him over. A woman's persistence, combined with a man's vanity, often achieves the desired outcome for the woman. To me, it seemed like the most logical conclusion to this unfolding drama, although I would have felt sorry for Jose. Samboro, on the other hand, looked visibly upset, but he made a show of devoting himself to Salia, who appeared delighted like a child with a piece of candy. Selina rode between Don Juan de la Borrasca and Aden. Her face appeared calm, but I couldn't help but notice that she was becoming careless with her authority. Her demeanor seemed distracted and indifferent. She seemed to have abandoned those little flirtations that had suited her so well. Nevertheless, as long as she kept her intelligence hidden, her beauty and captivating allure would continue to attract men and keep them under her spell. Every man, except for Melendez and Machado, looked as cheerful as the vibrant wildflowers, and as the girls galloped along, they resembled fully bloomed roses. Selina wore a dark blue dress and silk shawl, which suited her beauty remarkably well. "Yolanda Selena, the light of my eyes," said Don Juan. "You are not usually so quiet when I am with you. You usually have enough to say for both of us." "Oh, you appreciate the art of conversation? Have you ever known anyone who can talk more effortlessly than me and your brother?" "I have never heard anyone use more words." "Oh, they flow from my tongue and from Samboro's like wheels rolling downhill." She turned to Aiden. "Do you think Samboro and Salia will be happy?" "Oh, yes. What a beautiful wedding, right?" "Oh, yes. Is life always the same for you, smoking, riding, and swinging in the hammock?" "Oh, yes. You wouldn't trade your life for another? You don't want to travel?" "No, definitely not." She suddenly turned and galloped over to her father and Machado, her companions staring helplessly after her. When we arrived at the ranch, the cattle were already roasting in the pits, and the smell of cooked meat filled the air. We dismounted, handing our reins to the cowboys waiting there, and while Native American servants set the table, the girls joined hands and danced around the pit, throwing flowers on the cattle, singing and laughing. The men watched them or entertained themselves in various ways, some with cockfights and spontaneous races. Others immediately started gambling on a large flat stone. A group gathered around a greased pole and taunted 2 rival cowboys trying to climb it for the gold piece on top. One buried a rooster in the ground, leaving only its head exposed. Others, mounting their horses, raced by at full speed, trying to snatch the head as they passed. Samboro distinguished himself by easily twisting it off while urging his horse to the swiftness of the east wind. "I am going to dare more than any Californian has ever dared before," said Melendez to me as we gathered around the table. "I am going to get Yolanda Selena alone in that little canyon and have a talk with her." "Now do you stand guard?" "I won't," I exclaimed. "It is understood that when Yolanda Bastardo stays at home, Selena is in my charge. I will not allow such a thing." "You will, my Eustaquia. Yolanda Selena is no naive girl. She doesn't need a chaperone." I know that, but that's not what I'm concerned about. What if someone sees you? You know how strict our society's rules are. You forget that we are close friends. We have many privileges. He dismissed the intimate thou with his usual American stubbornness. True, I had forgotten. But where is all this leading, Jose? She neither wants nor can marry you. She both wants and can. Will you help me or not? Because if not, I will proceed without you. Only you can make it easier. I always gave in to him. Everyone did. He was as good as his word. How he managed, Selina never knew. But not even half an hour after dinner, she found herself alone in the canyon with him, seated among the large rocks that had been thrown there by cataclysms. "Why have you brought me here?" she asked. "To talk with you." But this would be severely criticized. "Do you care?" "No." She looked at him with a curious feeling she had experienced before. There was something inside his head that she wanted to understand, something that puzzled and intrigued her. She wanted to comprehend him, and she was burdened by her lack of knowledge. She had no way to decipher a man like that. With one of her impulsive urges, she shared her thoughts with him. He smiled, his eyes gleaming. "I'm more than happy to answer any questions you might have," he said. "Feel free to ask me anything." She paused for a moment. She had never been interested enough in a man to want to understand him, and the tactics of a Californian beauty were not those of a tactful and impartial woman of today. She didn't know where to start. "What kind of books have you read?" she finally asked. He gave her an overview of his extensive library, mentioning books from various countries that she had never heard of. "You've read all of those books?" "There are many long winter nights and days in the redwood forests of the northern coast." "That doesn't tell me much about what you've read. I feel like it's just one of the many things that make up who you are." "Have you traveled everywhere?" Was it like reliving the travel books? Not at all. Each person travels for themselves. Madame de Stael said that traveling was sad. Is that true? To someone who loves history, it's like food without salt. Imagination has painted a historical city with the grand events of the past. But when we visit, it's just a stage with ordinary actors and familiar props. So is it more satisfying to stay at home and read about it? Definitely, although it's less enriching. Then is anything worth pursuing besides reading? There are a few things. The pursuit of glory, for example, and the active and fulfilling life required to achieve it. She leaned in slightly, feeling like she was getting closer to him. "Are you ambitious?" she asked. "I'm ambitious for what life can offer, but not in an abstract sense. Ambition is like searching for flames in hell, above a desert of ashes. As for posthumous fame, it must be as unsatisfying as a gulp of ice-cold water poured down the throat of a man who has died in the middle of a desert. And yet, even if in the end it all amounts to nothing, if we continue to mature and decay with each passing hour, still, for a period of around 25 years, the sting of ambition tormenting our minds may serve to make life more engaging and fulfilling. The abstraction and complete involvement in the struggle, the sharp fear of competitors, the murmurs of recognition, the forced applause, they fill the gaps. "Tell me," she said authoritatively, "what do you desire?" "Shall I reveal it to you? I have never spoken of it to anyone but Machado. Should I confide in a woman, and an Iturbi Sala at that? Could man's foolishness go any further? If I am a woman, I am an Iturbi Sala, and if I am an Iturbi Sala, I carry the honor of its generations within me. Very well. I believe you would not betray me, even if it meant going against your own family's interests. Would you? No. And I enjoy conversing with you, sharing things I would never disclose to anyone else. Listen, then. An emissary will depart for Mexico next week, carrying letters from Machado, requesting that I become the next governor of the Californias and assuring that the departmental junta will support me. I will follow next month to personally meet Santa Anna. I know him well, and he was a friend of my father's. I wish to be granted exceptional powers. In other words, I want California to be effectively under my supervision while I am governor, and I want it to be understood that I will remain governor for as long as I please. Machado will not hold any position under the Americans, and is just as willing to retire now as he would be in a few years. Naturally, I must conceal my preference for the Americans from both the Mexican government and the majority of the people here. Santa Anna and Machado are aware of what is inevitable. The Mexicans, in general, still have enough interest in the Californias to want to retain them. I will be the final governor of the department, and during that time, I will work to integrate the native population so closely that they will become a strong part of the new order and completely under my control. I will establish a college with American professors so that our young people will be taught to think and to think in English. Machado has made some efforts in education, but they have been insufficient. He has not enforced it, and the methods are very outdated. My intention is to essentially become a dictator. Without delay, I will create a newspaper, a powerful tool in the hands of a ruler, as well as a catalyst for progress. Then, I will establish a superior court to deal with serious crimes. It's not that I don't recognize a person's right to kill if their reasons satisfy themselves, but there cannot be subservience to authority in a country where murder is practically permitted. American immigration will be strongly encouraged, and the Americans will be explicitly informed of my support for it. Every effort will, of course, be made to foster goodwill between the Californians and the newcomers. Then, when the United States decides to take control of us, I will avoid unnecessary bloodshed and hand over a country worthy of capture. In the meantime, I will ensure that Californians are convinced that American occupation will ultimately benefit them, and that I will go to Washington to safeguard their interests. As a result, there will be no foolish uprisings. Would you like to hear more? Her face was flushed. Her chest was rising rapidly. I can hardly comprehend what to think or how I feel. You fascinate me so much when you speak that I want you to succeed. I envision your success. And yet it infuriates me to hear you talk about the Americans in that manner, and to know that your house will be greater than ours, that we will be forgotten. But yes, tell me everything. What will you do then? First and foremost, I will explore California, in search of the gold that I believe is hidden somewhere within it. Once that valuable resource is discovered and utilized, I will advertise the extraordinary agricultural advantages of the country in every American newspaper. In short, my goal is to elevate California to the status of a prominent state, and to have its name associated with my own. As I mentioned before, I have no concern for fame itself. I do not care if I am forgotten on my deathbed. However, with a burning desire running through my veins, I must experience action while I am alive. Should I mention that I have a more noble motive in wanting to contribute to the advancement of civilization? But why would it be considered more noble? It is merely a higher form of selfishness. The best and worst motives are driven by the same instinct. I would advise you, she said slowly, never to get married. Your wife would be very unhappy. But no one despises the man who spends his life addicted to drugs more than you do. That's true. I had forgotten about that. She stood up suddenly. Let's go back, she said. It's better not to stay too long. As they walked down the canyon, she glanced at him secretly. Most of the men from her lineage were tall and well-proportioned, but they did not exude strength like this man did. And his face, it was so fiercely determined at times that she recoiled from it, yet also felt drawn to it, captivated. It had no appeal whatsoever by Californian standards. She couldn't know that it represented all that intellect, refinement, and civilization in general would do for the human race for a century to come. But it had a subtle power, an absolute audacity, an almost contemptuous fearlessness in its bold, refined outline, a dominating intelligence in the sharp-set, deeply set eyes, and a hint of vulnerability where and what she couldn't determine. That puzzled and fascinated her. I know you a little better, she said. Just a little, enough to make my curiosity ache and jump. At the same time, I now know what I didn't before, that I might climb and explore and study and observe, and you would always be beyond me. There is something elusive and evasive about you, something I seem to be close to always, yet never can see or grasp. It is simply the barrier of gender. A man can understand a woman fairly well because her life, and therefore the interests that shape her mind and generate her thoughts, are more or less straightforward. A man's life is so complex, his nature so inevitably the sum and result of it, lying so far outside of a woman's realm, his mind filled with countless magnets, each pointing to a different possibility, that she would need divine wisdom to comprehend him fully, even if he provided her with a diagram of every cell in his brain, which he never would, out of consideration for both her and his own vanity. But within certain limitations, there can be a profound sense of camaraderie. But a woman, I believe, would never be content with that something in a man always beyond her reach, that something to which she could mean nothing. She would be more envious of that independence of hers in a man than of another woman. That was pure insight, he said. You couldn't have known that, she replied. No, she said. I hadn't thought of it before. I had positioned myself as a martyr on a triangular stone at the entrance of the canyon, waiting to distribute their due. I will never do this again, I exclaimed, with that virtue born of discomfort, as they came into view. My dearest Eustaquia, said Jose, kissing my hand gallantly, you have pleased me so many times, most charming and clever of women. You have only added one new skill to your overflowing collection. We mounted almost immediately upon our return, and I was alone with Selina for a moment. Do you realize that you are playing with fire? I warned. Melendez is a dangerous man, the most successful man with women I have ever known. I do not deny his power, she said, but I am safe, for the many reasons you know of. And being safe, why should I deny myself the pleasure of talking to him? I will never encounter someone like him again. Let me live for a little while. Yes, but don't live too recklessly. It pierces deep into the core and essence. Chapter 20. While we were having dinner, a group of 12 Native American girls were gathered around a table in one of the large rooms at the back of the house, actively involved in emptying the contents of several hundred eggs and filling the hollowed shells with cologne, flour, glitter, and colorful bits of paper. Each egg was then sealed with white wax and prepared for the cascaron festivity of the evening. We had been dancing, singing, and chatting for an hour after evening prayers when the eggs were brought in. In an instant, every girl's hair was let loose. A wild scramble was made for the large trays, and eggs were thrown in all directions. Dancing was forgotten. The girls and boys chased each other around the room. The air was filled with fragrance and sparkling particles, the latter looking very attractive against their dark flowing hair. Etiquette required that only one egg be thrown at a time, but quick and agile wrist movements followed one after another in rapid succession. To truly achieve success, the egg had to collide with the back of the head, and each person engaged in the attack was an easy target. Selina behaved like a child. 2 priests were part of our group, and she targeted their bald heads, laughing with joy. They promised revenge and chased her throughout the house, but not a single egg managed to break against her golden hair. At one point, she found herself surrounded by gentlemen, but she swiftly spun and dodged, causing every cascaron to miss its mark. The bombardment grew more intense and frequent, invading every room as we chased each other up and down the hallways. Even the people in the courtyard had their cascarons, and the noise must have reached the mission. Don Hernandez joyfully shuffled around, covered in glitter and flour. Melendez attempted to hit Selina a dozen times, but she instinctively turned to face him before each egg could leave his hand. Eventually he pursued her down the hallway to her study, where, fortunately, I happened to be resting. Both of them collapsed into chairs, breathless. "Let's stay here," he suggested. "We've had enough of this." "Very well," she agreed. She bent down to pick up a book that had fallen from a shelf and felt the gentle impact of the cascaron. "Finally!" exclaimed Melendez contentedly. I was determined to conquer, even if it meant waiting until morning. Selina appeared momentarily annoyed. She didn't like being defeated. However, she then shrugged her shoulders and leaned back in her chair. The small room had simple furnishings. Shelves lined 3 walls, and the window seat and table were cluttered with books. There were no curtains, no decorations, but Selina's hair, flowing to the floor, her slender, attractive figure, her pale skin and green glowing eyes, the candlelight partially revealing, partially concealing, created an image that needed no background. I observed Melendez's expression and resolved to stay even if he killed me. Laughter, joyful screams, and mock terror cries drifted in towards us. I broke the uncomfortable silence. They are so happy, beings of air and sunshine. Life in this paradise is an ideal. They are not happy, said Melendez disdainfully. They are cheerful. They have light hearts due to the absence of material worries and endless sources of enjoyment, which in turn have bred a carefree state of mind. But if each one paused long enough to look into their own heart, wouldn't they find a stone somewhere in its depths? Perhaps a skull engraved on the stone, who knows? "Oh, Jose," I exclaimed impatiently, "this is a celebration, not a funeral." "Then is no one happy?" asked Selina longingly. "How can they be, when in every moment of achievement they are pricked by the knowledge that it will soon be over? The young person is not happy because the shadow of the future looms over them. The adult is not happy because they carry the understanding of life's incompleteness. Then what is the point of living at all?" "No point. It is also pointless to die, so we live. I will admit that there may be 10 completely joyful moments in life, the 10 conscious moments before certain death and oblivion. I won't discuss the comforting hope of our religion with you, because you don't believe, and it would only make me angry. But what are we supposed to do with this life? You say nothing is wrong or right. What should the stumbling and unanchored do with what has been thrust upon them? In the course of history, humanity has devised, suffered, and patched together certain social conditions that have effectively cultivated both the best and the worst aspects of our nature. These conditions have made it easier for us to act in a negative manner rather than a positive one, with goodness being the desired standard. We experience a deeper sense of satisfaction when we conquer our evil impulses and choose to do what is considered right, precisely because we have struggled and stumbled along the way. Temptation holds its allure not because it is inherently difficult to resist, but because it originates from the depths of our being. When we triumph over temptation, the resulting satisfaction is profound and long-lasting, revealing our inherent self-centeredness as humans, always depicting ourselves in an elevated light. However, those who break free from tradition and surrender to their impulses are denied happiness due to the mistakes made by previous generations, who arranged circumstances in a way that yielding was easy and resisting was difficult. If the conditions and outcomes had been reversed, the majority of humanity would have fought one another to the death, but a select few would have enjoyed a more favorable existence. Let us consider a hypothetical scenario based on the current state of affairs. Imagine, for the sake of argument, that you loved me and set aside your religion, loyalty to your home, and affection for your sibling to be with me. Initially, you would be overwhelmed by the enormity of such a sacrifice, until you realized that you had come to me simply because it would have been more challenging to stay away. By suppressing the passionate call of love, the most powerful expression known to humanity, you would lead a life of wretched happiness, as no attitude pleases the soul more than that of martyrdom. Many a person eagerly awaits the final farewell, as the prospect of sadness, suffering, and acceptance is oddly alluring. I was shocked by his boldness, but I noticed that Selina was captivated. Her self-centeredness was flattered, and her womanhood thrilled. "Are we all such frauds?" is what she said. "You make me hate myself. Not yourself, but a grand structure in which you are a mere speck with a flawed foundation. Don't despise yourself. Curse the builders who piled those stones together." He then left her, and she instructed me to go to bed. She wanted to sit and contemplate for a while. "He makes you think too much," I remarked. "It's best to forget what he says as soon as possible. He is quite a disruptive force." However, she remained silent and sat there, gazing at the floor. She began to feel a sense of helplessness, like a creature ensnared in a web. It was more the man's charisma than his words that made her feel as though he was permeating her being, seizing control of her mind in every sense, like an intellectual drug. "I believe I was created from his rib," she thought angrily. "Otherwise, why would he possess such extraordinary power over me? I do not love him. I have encountered love in my readings and observations. This is different, completely different. I merely sense that there is something within him that I desire. Sometimes I feel compelled to dig my nails into him and tear him apart until I uncover what I seek, something that rightfully belongs to me. At times it seems as though he promises it, while at others he seems oblivious to its existence. It is always fleeting. Will he make my mind his own? and yet he always seems to leave my thoughts undisturbed. He has never rebuffed me. He makes me think. There is the danger. An hour later, there was a knock on her door. Casa Grande was asleep. She sat up, her heart beating rapidly. Melendez was bold enough for anything, but it was her brother who entered. "Samboro!" she exclaimed, horrified to feel an unmistakable stab of disappointment. "Yes, it is I. Are you alone?" "Sure. I have something to tell you." He pulled a chair close to her and sat down. "You know, my sister," he began hesitatingly, "how I hate the Melendez family. My hatred is as loyal as yours. Every drop of blood in my veins is true to the honor of the Iturbi Isala family. But, my sister, isn't it true that one can sacrifice themselves, their personal feelings, for the sake of their country? Isn't it true, my sister? What is it you want me to understand, Samboro?" "Don't look so stern, Selina. You haven't heard me yet, and even though you may be angry then, you will reason later. You are devoted to our family, right? You came here in the middle of the night to ask me that question? And you love your brother? Samboro, you've had more drinks than Angelica. Go back to your bride." But even though she spoke lightly, she was uneasy. "My sister, I've never had a sip of alcohol in my life. Listen, it is our father's wish, your wish, my wish, that I become a great and distinguished man, a symbol of the Iturbi Isala family, a star in California. How can I achieve this great and desirable goal? Only through politics. Our wars are so insignificant. I have been barred from the departmental junta by the enemy of our family, otherwise my eloquence would have echoed through it, and Mexico would have known me today. Yet I care little for the junta. I want to become a congressman in Mexico. It's a more prestigious platform. Besides, in that bustling capital, I'll become a worldly man, which is necessary for exerting control over others. That's his power, curse him, and he won't allow me to go there. Even Machado listens to him. The local council is under his control. I'll always be nothing more than a gentleman from Santa Barbara. I, a member of the Iturbi Isala family, the last descendant of a line renowned in warfare, diplomacy, and politics, until he either dies— don't worry, my sister, I don't intend to kill him and ruin my career— or becomes my friend. Can't you express your meaning more concisely? My sister, he loves you, and you love your brother and your family." Selina stood tall, and although he also stood up and was taller, she seemed to look down on him. "You want me to marry him, is that what you mean?" "Yes." His voice trembled. Beneath his confident demeanor, he was always a little afraid of Selina's strong will. "You're asking for lies, disloyalty, and dishonor from an Iturbi Isala? An Iturbi Isala asks it of another Iturbi Isala. If the man is willing to sacrifice his own ambitions for the glory of his family, should the woman hesitate?" Selina gripped the back of her chair tightly. It was the only sign of emotion she showed. She knew that what he said was true. Melendez, for both public and personal reasons, would never allow him to go to Mexico. He would tolerate no enemies at court. But in that moment, this knowledge slipped through her mind. She was struggling to suppress a surge of contempt welling up inside her. She clung to her traditions as desperately as she clung to her faith. "Go," she said after a moment. "Will you consider what I have said? I will pray to forget it." "Selina!" His voice echoed so loudly that she placed her hand on his mouth. He brushed it away. "You will," he cried, like a spoiled child. "You will. I will go to the city of Mexico, and only you can send me there. All my father's gold and distances will not buy me a seat in the Mexican Congress unless this cursed Melendez lifts his hand and says, 'You shall.' Holy God, how I hate him! I wish I had the chance to kill him. I would cut his heart out tomorrow. And my father likes him and has outlived bitterness. And you are not indifferent. Go!" He threw his arms around her, kissing and caressing her. My sister, you will. Say that you will." But she pushed him away as if he were a snake. "Will you go?" she asked. "Yes, I go, but he shall suffer. I swear it, I swear it." And he rushed from the room. Selina sat there, staring more intently at the floor than when Melendez had left her. Chapter 21. Samboro didn't go to his Salia. He went down to the stalls in the town and joined the late party-goers. Don Hernandez, waking up before sunrise and pacing up and down the hallway to overcome the longing for Yolanda Bastaro's sweets, noticed that the door of his son's room was slightly open. He stopped in front of it and heard slow, steady, patient cries. He opened the door and entered. Salia, all alone, huddled up in a distant corner of her bed, with the covers over her head, was lamenting various things related to marriage. Upon hearing the sound of heavy footsteps, she let out a small scream. "It's me, Salia," her uncle said. "Where's Samboro?" "I don't know." "Didn't he come from the ballroom with you?" "No, oh. Do you know where he's gone?" "No, oh, sir." "Are you afraid?" "Yes, my goodness." "Never mind," said the older man. "Go to sleep. Your uncle will protect you, and this won't happen again." He sat himself by the bedside. Salia's sobs gradually stopped, and she fell asleep. An hour later, the door opened quietly, and Samboro entered. Despite the alcohol in his system, his knees shook as he saw the lenient but stern judge of the Iturbi Sala destinies sitting in judgment at his wife's bedside. "Where have you been, sir?" "Taking a walk, attending to—" "No lying. It doesn't matter where you've been. What I want to know is this. Is it your responsibility to gallivant around town, or should you be by your wife's side at this hour? Here, sir." The old man stood up, and grabbing the groom by the shoulders, shook him until his teeth chattered. "Then make sure you stay here with her from now on, or you won't be a married man any longer." And he stormed out and slammed the door behind him. Chapter 22. We spent the next day at the racetrack. Many of the gentlemen had brought their best horses, and Samboros were renowned. The cowboys threw off their shiny black hats and black velvet jackets, wearing only the short black pants laced with silver, a shirt of stunning whiteness, a silk bandana twisted around the head, and large spurs on their bare tan heels. Some of us stood on a platform, others remained on their horses. Everyone was filled with excitement and shouted themselves hoarse. The beautiful dark eyes of the girls sparkled, their red lips trembled with the rush of eager exclamations. The lace veil or flowery shawl fluttered against flushed cheeks, possibly to be ripped off and waved in the enthusiasm of the moment. They forgot about the men, and the men forgot about them. Even Selina was completely unaware of anything else for that hour. She was a famous equestrian and acutely aware of the magic of the racetrack. The men wagered their properties, their best horses, herds of cattle, their saddles, and their jewelry. Melendez won a substantial amount, and coincidentally, from Samboro in particular. Don Hernandez was more pleased than not, believing that his son needed further punishment. However, Samboro had to rely on both the Spaniard's courtesy and his own deceitful nature to remember that his enemy was his guest. We returned home for a nap and a lively supper, where the races were the sole topic of conversation. Then we danced, sang, and flirted until midnight, with the people in the booths as energetic as us. Carminia's attentions towards Melendez were as noticeable as usual, but he managed to spend most of his time with Selina. That night, Selina had a dream. She dreamt that she woke up without a soul. The feeling of emptiness was terrible, yet there was a strange underlying awareness that her soul had never been inside her, that it existed but was yet to be discovered. She got up, trembling, and opened her door. Santa Barbara was as quiet as the whole world is in the cold final hours of the night. She half expected to see something hovering in front of her, a captivating presence leading her over the rocky valleys and towering mountains until death granted her tired feet rest. She vaguely remembered reading legends with that theme, but there was nothing, not even the faint glow of a late cigarette or the twinkle of a shooting star. Still, she seemed to know where her soul awaited her. She closed her door gently and walked quickly down the hallway, her bare feet making no noise on the floor. She paused at a door on the opposite side, trembling violently, but unable to pass it. She opened the door and entered. The room, like all the others during that time of celebration, had more people than usual. There was a bed in each corner. The shutters and windows were open, allowing the moonlight to stream in, and she noticed that everyone was asleep. She walked across the room and looked down at José Melendez. His night attire, which sat low on his neck, made his head, with its sharply defined profile, resemble the heads on ancient Roman coins. The paleness of the night, the refined features of his face, and the deep tranquility gave him an otherworldly appearance. Selina leaned over him with fear. Was he dead? His breathing was regular but very quiet. She stood there gazing down at him. Her instinct to search vanished. What did this mean? Was he her soul? A man? How could that be? Even in poetry she had never come across the notion of a man being a woman's soul, a man with all his weaknesses and sins, mostly unrepentant. She felt, rather than knew, that Melendez had broken many laws, and that he cared too little for any law except his own will to repent. And yet, there he lay, appearing as innocent as if he had just been created. He did not look like a man, but like a spirit, a soul, and that soul belonged to her. Once again she questioned herself. What did this mean? Was the soul merely a mind? She and he were so similar in basic elements, yet he surpassed her greatly in experience, knowledge, and the stronger mentality of a man. Suddenly, he woke up and saw her. For a moment he stared in disbelief, then propped himself up on his hand. "Selina," he whispered. But Selina, with the graceful glide of a Californian woman, disappeared from the room. When she woke up the following morning, she was overcome with a troubling fear. Had she been in Melendez's room the previous night? The memory was too vivid, the details too practical for a sleep vagary. At breakfast she hardly dared to raise her eyes. She felt that he was watching her, but he often watched her. After breakfast they were alone at one end of the hallway for a moment, and she forced herself to raise her eyes and look at him directly. He was examining her intently. She was not a woman to tolerate uncertainty. "Tell me," she exclaimed, trembling from head to toe, the blood rushing to her face. "Did I go to your room last night?" "Yolanda Selina," he exclaimed. "What a bizarre question. You have been dreaming." Chapter 23. We attended a bullfight that day, danced that night, had a snack, and danced again. Took a nap in the afternoon, got a few hours of sleep at night, refreshing us all. Selina, alone, looked pale, but I knew that her paleness was not due to tiredness, and I knew that she was starting to fear Melendez. The time was almost here when she would fear herself more. Melendez had several private conversations with her. He managed it without any apparent scheming, but he always had cunning methods. Carminia sought revenge by flirting desperately with Samboro, and Salia's honeymoon was tainted with bitterness. On Saturday night, Selina sneaked away from her guests, put on a black dress and shawl, and accompanied by 2 Native American servants, went up to the mission to confess. As she left the church 30 minutes later and descended the steps, Melendez stood up from a bench beneath the arches of the hallway and joined her. "How did you know that I came?" she asked, and it was not the stars that illuminated her face. "You do little that I do not know."